Okay, I couldn't hear that from here. Okay.
We have we're going to show this. I guess you want to use this again. Using the emulator, using F2.
Well, yeah, you need the floor stand for.
Floor stand?
Yeah,
Oh,
that's what the whole counterbalance is for.
Okay.
What you can do is you can duct tape a bunch of the table stands together and make a floor stand out of it.
Are people going to come over and ask questions?
We're rolling? Okay. I want to thank you all for sticking through today. And again, just make the announcement that if there are any talks that you're particularly fond of, if you've noticed the very hardworking gentleman back there running the cameras, running back and forth between both rooms, all the lectures are being taped, and he's producing them on DVDs as quick as possible. So if there's something you really like, you want to take it back to coworkers or friends, or if there's a talk that you missed because you were looking at another talk you really wanted to hear, the talks are available for $20 in the vendor area. And he's producing them just about as quickly as he can, so you can literally walk out of a talk, wait a few minutes, and have the talk in your hand. And there's a party going on later on tonight you guys might have heard of. Woot. Woo. I want to hear a little more woot than that. That was kind of pathetic. Ooh. There we go. There we go. We got a ass load of booze. Thanks to Microsoft. Microsoft is doing some good by providing us with free booze tonight. It's all top shelf stuff, so it should be great. It's at the old Dachbodenlab. So if you guys know where that is, it's, well, where it used to be down in the basement of the church lots. If you don't know where that is, if you can just find a map of downtown and look for 10th Street, or actually look for E and head down E to hit 10th Street, it's right at the corner there. You should be able to figure out where it is from all the loud noise from the live band DJs that we've got going off down there. It's actually in the basement on the side of the building. On the entrance is the Black Gate on E Street. But if you just walk down there, listen for the loud music, and look for the drunken people wearing black T-shirts, you'll probably find it. So, will you be out front? Yeah. But right now we've got the nostalgia panel coming up. I'll actually let the moderator here introduce, or maybe I should let everyone on the panel introduce themselves. So without further ado, we've got the nostalgia panel for you with a lot of old school hacking. So let's give a big round of applause for all the participants here.
So thanks for coming out, staying so late. I guess this was originally supposed to start at 5, so it's 7 now, and talk for hours. Dan and I have talked till about 5 in the morning about X25 hacking, even just a month ago. So afterwards, if we run long and you still want to shoot the shit and talk about old stuff, feel free to come up. If you do stick around till the end of the normal talk, I have some giveaways, if you can answer questions. So mostly nostalgic giveaways as well.
Mooches.
So I guess without further ado, we'll do some quick introduction. Kind of give a bit of an outline of what I thought we might do, and it's very free form, so this is basically the only slide. So I'm Gray. You've probably never heard of me, and I'll explain why in a little bit. This is D&M, as you can see from our BBS logo here. We've got Damon right here, and Ambient Empire, and then finally Captain Crunch. So that said, so I saw Chris Abad's submission, and Dan's submission, and a bunch of other submissions with their sweet ANSI and ASCII, and Vlad's awesome compiling C submission. I just thought, fuck. Like, okay, personally, I'm 30. I haven't broken into other computers since I turned 18, or rather before I turned 18. And so that was, what, 93, something like that. And so it's been a long time. And I haven't really done anything that interesting, but I thought maybe I could just talk about my old stuff. And Dan submitted something, half hour later it was posted, and week goes by, I think, oh, it was fun. But Hikari actually called me and said, you know what, we got all these submissions and this and that, but nostalgia panel would be cool. And I thought so too. And he said, would you mind if other people talked with you? I thought that would be even better. So that said, sort of the general outline, I mean, I could talk a little bit about old stuff I did, but that might be better for the Q&A session. One thing, if you don't want to get busted, don't talk about what you do. And I haven't done that for 13 years. And maybe I'll reveal some stuff tonight, but it's actually a safe maneuver if you're doing stuff that, you've got the Digital Millennium Copyright Act and, Patriot Act and all this other bullshit. I think they just revoked habeas corpus the other day. So if you're worried about the hostile environment that we're living in, just keep your mouth shut and you'll be fine. So that said, as a general guideline, there's a lot of cool old stuff out there, and I think Dan and Damon can talk quite a bit about just cool old memory tricks and just cool hacking things that we have with constrained systems that we don't so much anymore. In addition to that, like in a constrained system is very limited. It's actually good for provability, and provability itself is good for security. It's not something we deal with too often. Just alternative. So functional programming. I love talking about list machines with Dan and multics a bit. Just hardware architectures we've lost. So things like list machines or multics. Like list machines, the last iterations had 48-bit CPUs. They did shitloads of garbage collection and hardware. So buffer overflows, integer overflows, all these out-of-bounds memory errors basically weren't exploitable. They'd throw an exception, and that would be it. And I think the last multics machine was made in 1988, and the last was manufactured in 93. That was the design thereabouts. And Thomas Lopatec didn't rediscover Morris's buffer overflow exploitation techniques until 94 or 95. So basically we discontinued these types of hardware before we even realized how useful they could be. So that's some stuff maybe we can cover. And at the end, I'd kind of like to say, here's some stuff we left behind. Here's some directions. Maybe we should pick these ideas up again and re-implement them. Like FPGAs are cheap. We could do these things in hardware or whatever. So that's kind of a general outline. Maybe I'll pass it over to Damon or Dan, and they can talk a little bit about Apple II stuff. Does that sound good?
Well, all right. I'm DNM. I just talk next door. In terms of so Gray just gave you an overview of what his idea of the project and of this panel discussion was about. Damon, wave Damon. Everybody see Damon? He's kind of obscured by shadow. Damon's a friend of mine who I do a lot of work with professionally and on projects. And basically, I had come back from a trip, and I talked to Damon, and I'm like, Damon. And he said, yes. And I said, you should present something at ToorCon. He's like, well, about what? I'm like, I don't know. How about, playing around with Apple II emulators? And he's like, okay. And this came out because who went to DEF CON? All right, most people. Who heard of or went to or some drunken awareness of Caesar's Challenge this year? And or is Caesar in the room? Kind of, yeah, all right. So Caesar's Challenge this year, is Druid in the room? So Caesar's Challenge was essentially you got a little postcard which was had some machine code on it, and you had to figure out what it did, right? And I spent the better part of 2 hours going down a wrong hole because I looked at it and I'm like, this looks like 6502, or not assembly but machine code, right? And I thought that, and I immediately thought Apple II. And so I started playing around with Apple II emulators on my PowerBook and spent 2 hours doing exactly the wrong thing, but having a lot of fun doing it. It ended up not being actually, it was 6502, but it was a C64 code, which is what, sorry? 6810. Right, so it was a little bit different. But essentially, that's sort of spurred my interest in thinking about at ToorCon, because I was doing the FPGA talk. I was really wanted to talk about old school hardware and constrained systems because it's something that maps to doing work in FPGAs. And Damon was interested in playing with this stuff because he hadn't really played with it before. And I'll let you talk about that.
So I'm pretty much coming at this from the exact opposite angle as everybody else. Everybody else here has actually done stuff, and I've done nothing. So I don't really know what I'm doing up here. But Dan showed me an Apple II emulator, and I haven't actually touched an Apple II since I was a smaller, obedient little turd version of myself in 3rd grade, and since then haven't seen one. So for the last 3 months, I've been playing around with Apple II emulators and having the time of my life. The reason I'm up here is sort of a three-pronged attack, things that I see happening that I'd like to change. One of them was up, I didn't have any like computer-based community around me, and so I'd like to start those or start seeing those happen more often. Part two of that is that I've seen a lot of papers that have talked about the community in general getting older and not getting a lot of new blood in, which seems to represent what I've actually seen myself. And I think one of the reasons for that might be that modern and current times you've been at, you know, what's the standard accepted language at the time, and then sort of work your way backwards, right? So somebody starting out now would be starting out to look for, you know, their job and would start with, say, .NET. And then that's about as far away as you can get from, you know, Apple II assembly. So being able to play with emulators gives you something really simple to work with, simple to start out with, and doesn't get you drowned in this complexity that people have to deal with today. And then the third one is, well, I don't remember it right now, so maybe in 5 minutes or so.
Chris.
What? I've got to talk? It's fucked up.
He took the words out of my mouth. I have no fucking idea why I'm up here, really. When I think about it, the people who probably should be up here are like Simple Nomad back there and like Sardistic out on the patio. Like, not me. I'm not fucking old school. But then, I mean, it flips back and forth. I mean, how many people here is this your first, second, or third conference? Not very many people, really. So maybe what he was saying is right, you know. There's not that many new people in this shit. I have no clue what I'm going to say right now. Why did you make me talk?
Hikari gave us some good additions.
Oh, okay.
I thought you'd...
Well, Chris, tell everybody about tell everybody about the creation of your submission to the CFP, because you were the first CFP that got submitted that posted to the Toor2114 website.
Yeah,
by a show of hands, how many people saw Chris's submission? All right, so people know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I guess you could pull it up on the internet thing. Put it on the internet.
It's a series of tubes, I hear.
It's a series of tubes. People still do these fucking things all day. It's not like ANSI and ASCII graphics are like old school. Where's groups are still doing this shit like to this day, and it's pretty awesome actually. The back of the T-shirt, if you guys saw the back of the T-shirt, looked pretty good. The logo at the top was done by Jack Flash of like CIA, ACID. If any of you guys are from the BBS kind of 94, 95, 96 kind of period of time, you probably saw a lot of ACID. Like that motherfucker, DH, he did doodling shit, dark. I'm still rambling. Yeah, I guess it was the first CFP. Me and David were just at Recon, and I was like, damn, I don't know anybody here at Recon. It was like all Canadian French people, and I felt like, what am I doing here? And then David was there. I'm like, oh, I'll go talk to David, and he goes on and on about talking about, this time we're going to have some sweet ASCII at the conference. I'm like, hell yeah, I love sweet ASCII. I always do sweet ASCII stuff. And then I'm like, CFP, and it'll be like a .info file. And then, who did the file ID diz one? I think was it Dean? I think it was Dean. And it was fucking 80 column. You know, but I guess he's like a noob. He should know that a file ID diz is 40 columns always. It's pretty cool times.
If people, I'm going to interrupt Gray before he talks. If people have questions or comments or just want to, like, you know, heckle, that's why I have the wireless. So just get my attention, and then I'll come over to you.
These lights are in my fucking face.
Captain Crunch, you want to talk a bit?
Captain Crunch.
Sure. I guess I'm the oldest one here. How many have been around in 1972? Not very many, huh? Well, I want to dispel a few myths around here about the Captain Crunch whistle. Contrary to popular belief, I really did not figure out the Captain Crunch whistle. That was basically turned on to me by some blind kids. They actually discovered me. I was experimenting around with an FM transmitter to get a signal report, and I put it on the air for about a half an hour, played a couple records, drove around to see how far I could pick it up. I came back home and announced, gave my phone number out over the air and said, hey, if anybody can hear me, give me a call, and gave my out. Sure enough, I got a call, and turned out that there was this guy with a kind of a DJ kind of a voice asking some questions about it, whether or not I was going to go on the air on a more permanent basis. And I said, no, not really. So I decided not to worry about it too much. And then I says, could I have your number? So I'd like to ask you for a signal report in the future, because I'm going to be doing some more experimenting around with my new antenna design. And he gave me a number, and it was 264-0044. And at the time, I did not really know what that number was, but when I did wound up wanting to call him, I got a loud tone on the line. So I thought maybe the phone was out of order, so I called the operator up, and I says, operator, I think this number's broken. Maybe you should report it to repair. And she says, how did you get that number? I says, I don't know. It was given to me by this person who called me. And she says, that's a special telephone number. You're not supposed to call that number. I said, well, thank you very much. I won't call it anymore. Goodbye. So a little bit later on, about 2 weeks later, I got another call, and it was from the same person. But this time, this person was calling me not in relationship to the FM transmitter, but in relationship to some phone freak activity he'd been doing. He'd been scanning, but he's blind, and he remembered my number from before, but did not really remember exactly what the number was for. So he called me up, and we talked a little bit, and he said he was a phone freak. Now, what's a phone freak? And he says, well, we're blind kids. We play around with a phone. And I was looking for a demonstrator. I said, what's a demonstrator? Oh, it's a number that you call. It issues you a dial tone that you can then demonstrate a touch tone telephone. At the time, in 1972, I was living in South San Jose at the time, and there was no touch tone available at that time. It was number 5 crossbar, dial phone. So that was my first introduction to phone freaks. A little bit later on, I wound up going over there to talk to the kid and visited him. He invited me over there, actually, and kind of like, we talked a little bit about technical things. So afterwards, I go over there and I met his parents, and, oh yeah, it's in the back room. I go in the back room, and everything is all dark in the room. There's nobody needs lights. They're all blind people. So I says, do you mind turning on the lights? So I see some of the kids there, and every one of them was blind. One person, Jimmy, as I remember, had an organ hooked up to the phone line. He says, I says, well, tell me more about how you make free phone calls and stuff. And he says, well, Jimmy here will demonstrate. And he used an organ, and he made a first blue box call. I says, oh, I remember those tones. I remember hearing those when I make a long-distance call. I says, so that's what they are. Isn't that the same as touch tones? He says, oh, no, they're different tones. They're called multi-frequency tones. I says, oh, really? Well, that's strange. I never heard of that before. So he started giving me the frequencies. I started dutifully copying them down, and a little bit later on, I went home, and within, I'd say, 45 minutes, I had my first blue box working. I had a lot of hardware parts, and it didn't take me long to figure out how to make an oscillator. And I had basically 6 buttons on the box. I had to press 2 out of the 6 buttons to make a number. So it was very crude, but it was just enough to actually demonstrate the fact make a free phone call, and it blew me away. I couldn't believe it worked. And things went on and on and on, and a lot of the MF tones, multi-frequency tones, were basically described in a website called wideweb/phone trips, or wideweb.com.org. I'm not sure which one it is, but phone trips. And in there you'll find a file called Classic Tandem Stacking that was narrated by Doorbell. I highly recommend you take at that file and listen to it. I believe it's in MP3. It's also in WAV format. I'd also like there's several different approaches I could take. I know we have limited time here. So do you want me to kind of go into some technical kind of things about how the phone system worked back then? Or do you want me to elaborate on a few things on some of the stories that we did and some of the really cool things that we did with the Blue Box? And my association with Steve Wozniak and things like that. I mean, I'm going to cover some of these anyway, but I'm going to cover a little bit of the technical things about how the phone system worked. And I think I'll just spend a few minutes on that. Basically, long-distance trunks are controlled by a 2600 hertz tone, and when a trunk is not being used, each of these 2 trunks are whistling 2600 at each other. So when the phone lines are not being used is when they're actually using more electricity. And that, by the way, was an argument in court about my case, because the phone company came back and said that I was using electricity, when indeed, actually, the truth is I was using less electricity. because the 2600, when it goes away, is when you can actually make conversation on the phone line. So with that in mind, basically the way it works is you send a 2600 hertz down the tone on any long distance call that was using N carrier. They call it N carrier. The 2600 on the other end is then the trunk on the other end thinks you're done with the call and thinks you've hung up on the call. It then goes ahead and issues a 2600 wink back to me. When the wink back comes back to me, I send it a wink back to it to acknowledge the fact that I hung up, and it acknowledged the fact that I acknowledge the fact that it hung up. So therefore, the call is now completed. However, since I really didn't, in actuality, hang up the phone, I still happen to be on the phone, and I still happen to be connected to the trunk line. So all I did was blow the 2600, go a little chink noise, and I could just then send the key pulse area code number start and make a call. And all routing codes work. Like you wanted to call like Fred inward operator, you do key pulse 042121. 121 is a universal code for reaching the operator in a distant city. So to call a New York operator, you dial 212121. So that's sort of how things worked back then. 131 was information, 141 was route rate operator, 101 was test board, and I think 161 was something else. I kind of forget what it is. So that's sort of how that all works.
I might interject for a minute. Like a lot of this stuff, it's funny because it is old, and it's like now we have SS7, and actually SS7 is going the way of SIP and MPLS. And I worked a lot with SS7 as my first job out of school. But if any of you read Matt Blaze's research paper, I think it was last year from University of, it was Penn State? Yeah, it was wiretap, but it was actually, all these SS7 wiretap systems for legacy support still have in-band signaling support. And as a result, most of them can be thwarted by actually generating a C-tone. Right. Which, so it's very similar to the old stuff.
And now I can make free phone calls. Actually, I've got a really cool system set up for $10 a month. I have an incoming phone line from a Voice Pulse. I'm going to my Asterisk PBX server. I have a outgoing is VoIP stunt. They give me free unlimited calls to 30 countries, flat rate, free calls, and there's no charge for that. It's free. So that's how I make my free calls now, legally, and no problem.
And too, like, I mean, I thought about talking about a lot of stories from the past, but some things like certain types of hacking, like, to explore systems or phreaking, it's like, yeah, there's flat rate long distance pretty much anywhere, and it's super cheap, and there's no risk, so why not just pay? Exploring systems, we're pretty much in a hegemony of Windows or Unix. It's like there's no Plan 9, there's no VMS, there's no MPE, like all these systems I used to with just don't exist anymore.
There were no computers back then.
Right, yeah. So there was a lot more variety. What is still there? So there are some, and there's like QNX, and there's,
Sorry, eat the mic. Yeah, I was just going to say, MVS is still there, VM is still there. Thank God Ultrix is gone. It's interesting because at what's happened in probably the past 5 years, post 9/11, your banks, your insurance companies, your hospitals have all said, fuck it to the internet, and they've all gone right back to 3270, which is hysterical because they haven't bothered to patch any of the holes that sits you into the 3270. Sure. But how many people in this room have a SNA book?
Right.
No, I see one hand, yeah. How many people in this room know what LU6.2 is? How many people can do, NCF? If you can do all that old mainframe shit from the 60s and 70s, knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Right, but jumping back
you
to
can
the
wreak all
past,
kinds of havoc.
Right. You need to be really careful if you're going to take that route, because if you're going back to closed proprietary protocol, I don't know if any of you guys saw Mark Grimes' SCADA talk last year. Basically tore apart, at least 3 SCADA protocols. These are 30, 40 plus year protocols that they were never open. They were always closed systems. And then, I remember he sort of retold the story without telling me everything that's going on. It's like, well, they gave me the project, and you should have seen the looks on their faces when a week later I'd broken all 3 of them catastrophically. If you put this in front of a modern hacker with network protocols, they'll say, oh, well, sure, I deal with TCP, but it's just like, I look at FTP or HTTP or whatever, here's how I destroy it. Here's how I do cross-site scripting with JavaScript. Falling back on something old, and this does happen, it is not necessarily a good strategy. Actually, and going with stuff that can be audited and looked at by community and improved, I think is a winning strategy. And SCADA still has a lot of problems.
So 2 things quick. Chris's CFP is up on the main screen here. So Chris,
What?
talk about it.
No.
Oh, you were talking about it
No,
before.
I was going to touch the computer, though. I wanted to use the internet real quick.
The other main thing here is.
I mean, back then, everyone had a telephone, and most of the people that really liked to play with these phones were blind people. Why? Because that's their only input to the outside world, is the audio input is them. They don't get visual input, they only get audio input, and the telephone is pretty good at passing audio information. And so that's why it became very popular. And one of the things that I did while I was there was a lot of conference calls. One of them was the 2111 conference. Then there was the 1121 code. That one was the interesting number you dialed. It would go 5 cents, ding, 10 cents, ding, ding, quarter, gong. And that was like a little training tape that operators would call to let them know what it sounds like when money goes into the telephone. So we started banging out TTC codes. These are the codes that you put that go into inward operators and things like that. And we mapped the entire system out, the whole phone system. I got every single TTC code. Found some really interesting things in there. Key pulse 91552, for instance, would bring you into the AT&T conference bridge. From there, you could conference up to about 20 different people through the AT&T's network. It was like direct tandem access, too, which means beautiful 4-wire connections to conference calls. 4 wires. We're not talking about 2 wires here. We're talking 4-wire connections. Absolutely excellent audio. And you had all kinds of different controls on it, too. You can kick people off, and that's sort of kind of like the start of like chat channels back then. No, the Alliance is totally different. That came much, much later than the AT&T Conference Bridge. Oh, shit. That came around 1975, 1974. I think that's when I became aware of the Alliance Conference. And then around 1975, I think it was, 74, I think, maybe around in there, I started experimenting around scanning all the 800 prefixes in the entire country. Back then, an 800 number would map into a regular telephone. Since 202456 would really map into 800-424. So it's 6-digit translation. What this meant was that an 800 number really had a 10-digit counterpart back then. Now it's totally different. And we found some really interesting numbers. We found the congressional tie line system that you called an 800 number. It gave you a dial tone, and you could just call out. No security code at all. Just make as many calls as you want to. And if you dial 9 for the line, dial 8 for watts, and dial 7 for FTS. It's called the Federal Telephone System.
Right. I mean, back then, I mean, you're probably all familiar with the term security through obscurity. I mean, that was a lot of it, but it wasn't even necessarily obscurity. I mean,
you won't find these numbers in the phone book.
Yeah, right. I mean, a lot of times there wasn't security. I mean, actually today, in my opinion, like a lot of what would commonly be called hacking or cracking is actually a lot more challenging. I'll go over this, I guess, during the giveaways. Maybe I can show it now. But here's a book from 1985 on Microsoft Press, actually, called Out of the Inner Circle, A Hacker's Guide to Computer Security by the cracker Bill Landreth. And he wrote this when he was 17 or 18. And it's basically chapter upon chapter of password guessing strategies. And this was literally it. I mean, getting root back in my day was not, buffer overflow. It's like the Morse worm was 88, but like I read about that, and that was like, wow, I wasn't even on the internet. I was just dialing up BBSs, right?
I met the author of that book in 1994, 1995. Actually, he lived in downtown LA at some weekly hotel or something like that.
Yeah, I haven't heard from him for a while, unfortunately. I dug up some stuff from maybe the mid to late 90s on him. But, I mean, it wasn't necessarily challenging in the way you think of things as being challenging today. Like, I use buffer overflows to crash boards or disconnect users, but I didn't know back then that you could actually execute your own code from buffer overflow. Like, sort of predated that in Thomas Lopedic and, Aleph ones, smashing the stack for fun and profit. That all came after, actually, I stopped doing stuff for the most part. It doesn't mean we still didn't have a lot of fun, but it wasn't necessarily as complex or as much technical aptitude. And a lot of it, John was saying, even with, it was friends telling friends information. Just, you know, oh, well, here's a number I found, here's what you can do with it, here's some tones, you know, try building this. I mean, how many people in the room probably built the Redbox with the Radio Shack tone dialer replacing the crystal? Wow, I was expecting like half the audience.
How many tried to use those little greeting cards? Yeah, those are cute. Those are cute.
Exactly, exactly. And like, you know, Fry's Electronics, like the old one in Santa Clara, like the one designed like a circuit board that's closed, Fry's, like they were always sold out of those. It was like such a hassle, and like we'd find them and we'd buy them all out because we could give them to friends. So, I mean, that's more my era, right? But
I think the last known date that I know of where red boxes actually worked was actually right here in San Diego at the public library in 1995, 1996. It actually worked. You could actually make a red box call. But even back then, I'd say 90% of the payphones they had filters in them now that you couldn't do that.
Last year at TGI Fridays.
Yeah, okay.
oh, okay, X25.
There you
How many people messed around with X25? Just show of hands. Okay.
X25.
So. Oh, nice. Very nice. So
I wouldn't be
DEF CON 3, that was
surprised.
probably after I stopped doing stuff. But X25, like, I mean, Dan and I had this talk. Like, for me, like, some people really messed around in X25. Like, for me, it was just another thing, like a hack PC pursuit account, or I just use it as an global out. So I could dial in once and dial out and not have, like, to pay a bill. And, I mean, now that's pointless, right? Like, get flat rate long distance. You don't need to do that. And, but it was pretty useful at the time. And that was just word of mouth. Like, I don't know, I traded some wares. There was just a friend who told me the number. And in return, like, I gave him a number for something later that got us internet access. Which I'll touch upon with one of my giveaways, just because it has a little personal
You're not seeing what's going on
nostalgia
the
for us.
screen here, are you?
Oh. What's he doing? Oh, great. Well, I'll reinstall OS 10 after I get my computer back.
So, 1975 or so was when I first got my, I'll answer questions in a second, was when I got my hands on an Apple II computer. When I was actually working for Wozniak at Apple Computer in a little annex building next to the main building. At the time, I believe there's like about 8 or 9 employees there. I was with Randy Wigginton and a number of other people. Daniel Cockey was working on the hardware. And I was working on a telephone interface board. I had hardware experience, and I designed a circuit, and my original circuit had 9 chips, and Wozniak cut it down to 5. He's actually using part of the address line. We had a 6-bit DAC, and I was using an 8-bit DAC, and Woz says, ditch the DAC, we can do it a better way. He says, why don't you use the 2 address lines, data lines? So therefore, I could then use a much cheaper 6-bit DAC, which was like 1/10 the cost of that 8-bit DAC. So, I followed Woz's design and suggestion and did the circuit and got it working. And one of the things that I did was I wrote this little program that would just call up a number, right? And I put it on a little cassette tape, because that was the only thing you can put your programs on, was a little cassette tape, because the little Panasonic recorders was our only off at the time. Floppy disks at that time didn't exist. So I put the cassette tape on Woz's desk and says, here's a program I wrote for you. You can play around with it or whatever. And so I come back the next day, and Jobs was just on me like you couldn't believe it. He was so ticked off. I said, what's going on? Why are you so mad? And it turned out that Woz programmed the phone board on the Apple to call Jobs to the house over and over again. And it's like... And I used it also to do some scanning, and I used it for scanning 800 numbers, and I found this 800-424-9337 number in Washington, D.C. And the guy that answered the phone was extremely obnoxious to me. I says, gee, why is this guy so mad at me calling this number? Because 800 numbers, they want to encourage you to call them. That's why they're free. So I wrote a little question mark against there, and I said, I better check into this later. So after about a couple weeks later, or a week later, I did some social engineering. I called the guy back up, and I says, hi, this is AT&T Long Lines Division in White Plains, New York. We're having some translation problems on your 800 number. What number have we reached, sir? He says, you've reached the CIA crisis hotline into the White House. Oh, thank you very much, sir. Click. So then I did the 800-424-9337 mapped really to 202-456-9337. So the 202 number was, and it just so happened very, very soon after that, they had just put in this little system called the Auto Verify. Back then in 1975, TSPS was getting pretty popular at the time. It wasn't fully implemented yet throughout the whole system. But it made so that the TSPS operators would not have to call the special operator in a distant city to do emergency breakthroughs, because a TSPS operator could do it from anywhere now. So it turns out that 202.072 followed with the phone number. You have to actually be in the 202 in order to do it. So you do KP072, follow that with a regular 4569337, and that would just pop into the line. But you'd hear a high-pitched squeal. This is because it was like scrambled, so you couldn't hear the conversation. But if you just gave it a little burst of 2600, it would knock off the scrambler, and you could hear the voice. You could hear all the voice perfectly well. So we unstuck the microphone, we listened in for a while on that line. And, calls, it didn't take long for a call started coming in. So one of the persons said something about, let's see, he said, Olympus, please. And the guy says, 1 moment, sir. And what I could have swore, it sounded like Nixon coming on the line. And he says, Olympus here. And then the guy says, answer the scramble phone right away. We've got a crisis. And then the conversation went dead at that point. So then I said, wow, President Nixon on that special hotline. I better write this number down. So I kind of kept it for a while and didn't really do anything with it. And then I went down to some parties or something like that a couple weeks later, and some phone freaks or something like that had a really cool number, and I wanted it really badly. So I says, I'll trade you. He says, what you got to trade? I says, a crisis number to the White House. He said, you got what? And I says, I got the CIA crisis hotline number to the White House. It's an 800 number. And I even have the code name that will get President Nixon on the line. He says, nah, you're kidding. You really won't. Here, try it. Gave him the number, and I sat back and let these other guys call up, and they decided that they'd do a little bit of a prank. So when they called up the number, they said, Olympus, please. 1 moment, sir. And when Nixon came on the line, he says, sir, we have a national crisis on our we're out of toilet paper, and we hung up. Now, a few weeks later, there was another instance. Actually, it was in the LA Times, if I remember correctly. There's an interesting thing that happens when you're using 2600 signaling, especially on the old GTE exchanges. It was an end office that ended up in Santa Barbara. So if you call like just like not quite long distance out of Santa Barbara, but sort of like toll call, you'd get a little you'd blow it off with 2600, and you could you then use single frequency to dial the last 4 digits of the number. Go beep 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 like that, and then you can then get the redial back the number that you just got disconnected from. So we sat there and we just kept the 2600. We did this with 2 phones simultaneously. We dialed the number up with 2 phones simultaneously. What happens is we just connected the 2 phones together, and we dialed out. And when we dialed out, one would be busy and one would go through. We kept doing that and kept doing that.
I'm going to interject here just because we got like a 5-minute warning, 10-minute. Okay.
Yeah.
And maybe we didn't get to see any Apple II stuff yet. Do you want to fire that up?
Okay. Fire it up. Fire up the internet.
Well, let me just give me 30 seconds on it.
Well,
So we were actually intercepting phone calls going into Santa Barbara, and we were telling people calling into Santa Barbara there was a nuclear accident. Okay, talk to me about it later, okay?
So, I mean, there's lots of great old techniques that maybe don't
These
work
are
so much
pranks that we
anymore.
did.
There's old techniques that still work. I mean, all the password guessing stuff in this book, unfortunately, still works on a lot of systems just because it's fucking password guessing, right? Which is really depressing. Like, haven't we evolved in 20, 30, 40 years? But no, we haven't. Exactly. Everyone's still an idiot for certain things. Good comment. Excellent comment. Other things, I mean, certain things like I did, which I hate faxes. I wish fax machines would die. Some of you probably did this trolling technique. I know I did, where you'd write some offensive message on a fax, and then you'd feed it through, and then as it came out the bottom, you'd tape it to the top, and it would just like endlessly fax this person, and like that was a good way to piss people off. So, and it would still work. It's good technique.
Oh, dude,
Good times.
Yeah, right.
Okay, are we ready with the Apple II stuff? Woohoo! Is it coming up?
Is it on the internet? Is it there? Is the screen on?
I see stuff, but maybe I need to drag the window
Yeah, I
over.
got to drag the window over here. Hang on.
All right. Woo!
So, actually, the coolest thing about this is that I get to control my little Apple II machine here with AppleScript, which is sitting right here. You'll notice that this is actually the worst program ever written. It's pretty much AppleScript telling this guy to write Apple Basic. So, and I only actually had time to get one of these finished because I got a lot busier this last month than I thought I was going to be. So, without further ado, here it goes. The coolest part of the Apple II for me is how easily you can just draw right on the screen. It's going really slowly here.
So while this is running, one thing that Damon and Dan were talking about, I mean, it's really good to do this sort of thing because it's much simpler hardware. Like, I mean, nowadays you're working at such a high level with so many abstractions. Like, you just don't get down low and okay, this is basic, and he's doing an AppleScript, but it's like, what's the next step? It's like 6502 assembly, right? So, you start messing around with that, or sorry. The quad laser?
That was way too much time, and there's no way all of you could have dodged it at once anyway.
And there was a history, too, we don't see in hardware architecture. Like, Dan was schooling me on 68000s being, like, basically derived from a PDP-11. And, like, back they designed hardware sort of forward-thinking, Like, it was 32-bit, but they couldn't afford all the stuff to do a full-fledged design, so they had the addressing there, even though, like, you didn't have as much memory. Was that basically it? I don't even remember. But
oh, it had a 16-bit bus. It was a 30-bit CPU internally. So I just want to give Damon a round of applause for Apple scripting AppleSoft, because it's just ridiculous but cool. So.
Actually, is Ian in here? Yeah.
Yeah, you can do all that.
Ian back there by Spoonem learned bitwise operations through an Apple II game, and I want to know the name of it, and I don't remember. Ian, wake up. By Spoonem. Ian. What was the name of the Apple II game that taught you bitwise operations? This was a video game. Rocky's Boots, okay? There you go. I mean, we don't have fucking video games like that anymore. Like, he played a game and learned, like, Boolean logic. Like, how fucking awesome is that, basically? I mean, there's a lot of things, like, we should maintain. And, I mean, maybe you run that in an emulator, and that's cool, but...
So something awesome about this that you can't see because it's big right now, but if you actually look down here, there is a cassette tape. So you can play AV files in here and load programs off of them.
Can you mic the sounds? Did you turn on the sounds?
Yeah, I don't have a...
Do you have a working speaker?
I don't know who can actually hear this, but...
Just mic next to the speaker.
So on top of that, if you've got the setup button, this is the opening the computer. So it's got like all the original sounds buried in it somewhere.
So, I mean, there's some older systems too we don't have emulated. List machines.
Stop for a second. Let me show you something. Do you have the Apple II on there? Do you have the Apple II or no?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
Do you have chocolate?
So while they're doing that...
So here, we can only do one display at a time, right? All right. So...
Oh, actually, I have a projector.
It came in a basic file. They printed out for you. You had to type it in yourself.
No, let's not get into like old system wars like Trash 80, Atari ST versus Amiga. Like, let's just forget about that. Like, those were great. Like, there are systems like, I mean, now there's the Cotter list machine, MIT list machine emulator, but there's no Symbolics list machine emulator.
Let me talk for a second.
Go for it.
Do people want to see source code to stuff? Who wants to see source code to stuff?
Yeah, I want to see source code.
Although it's weird, but I'll show you source code. Here, move your laptop, Gray.
What's this source code?
see some C64 demos.
All right, while I wait for this to come up. What is that? No.
Yeah, yeah.
Chug it.
The mermaid map was glitching, so they were able
All right, hold on a second while I clear up the screen here and see what I got. All right.
Crazy.
Everybody can see this, yes? Sweet. All right. So, oh, here, Apple II. Bink. All right. So Damon just showed you the 2E emulator. I mean, you can. This particular emulator was written by a guy, Gerhard, who did a really good job. It's implemented entirely in C++. The actual emulator, the C6502, the 6502 and then 65CO2 is all done in C++, and he wraps an Cocoa interface around it. The one thing I wanted to show here is two things. One is we saw Abad's CFP submission earlier, and then I'm going to show the one that I did just purely because it has some relevance to the code I'm going to show. Let me find it. I'll go over here. Documents. Let's see. Cheap crack CFP. Where is it? Is that your wireless, Gray? Yes. Yeah. I can't see my fucking wireless. Yeah, actually, outlet. You're right. That's a good idea. Somebody is smart in the audience. There it is. Sweet. All right. Can people read that? Not really. Hold on. Kind of? Okay. I'll just make it. There. Is that better? More? All right. Better? All right. Let's do that. Screw it. All right. So this obviously, I can't really show a lot of this in one screen. But for people who are, I mean, maybe the first series of instructions here. Does everybody know what this is off the top of their head? You're seeing word wrap, but here, go look in front of it. Just go walk down to the front. Can you see it from here?
I can't regulate it.
I'll scroll down. Hold on a second. Let me just turn off word wrapping. No, I mean this is written. This was not. I mean this is annotated, but it's handwritten. All right. So what this is. This is me taking a disassembly that Steve Wozniak wrote of a thing called Sweet 16. Who's heard of Sweet 16? Oh wow, more people than I've heard. All right, sweet. I'm gonna go to one of you and get an explanation. I took Sweet 16 disassembler. So all the source code, mind you, all the assembly source code to the Apple II monitor is available, and it's open source. It was open source when it was put out. Right, so you can go look at it. Yeah, it's all essentially like this. It's annotated disassembly, right? So Sweet 16, go for it.
Sweet 16 was a 16-bit assembly language built into the Apple DOS on top of an 8-bit set. It was 16-bit addressing with 8-bit instructions.
Yeah, it's you're like 70% there. You want to take a step? All right. So he's mostly right. What Sweet 16 was a virtual, non-existent 16-bit CPU implemented in 300 bytes of 6502 machine code that Wozniak put into the original Apple II ROM. It's not in any other later ROM. Purely to be able to do 16-bit pointer addressing in integer basic. And this is it. Like this file essentially is the annotated disassembly of Sweet 16. So I found it. And I thought it was. I mean, again, I'm doing a lot of hardware stuff, FPGA stuff, and I thought it was just cool that he managed to cram in 300 bytes of memory into the ROM a complete CPU architecture that ran 10 times slower than native 6502 code, right? It was 10 times as slow to do anything in Sweet 16 as it was to do in straight 6502. But you could actually manipulate 16-bit pointer information. That's mainly the reason he did it. It got removed later because everybody started writing programs that didn't use it anymore, and the room in the ROM for other things, right? But the thing that was neat about it also was his solution was just to say, essentially, I'm going to use memory in the early 0 page of the 6502 purely to be able to be my own register set. So we have 16 registers, right, which are just like arbitrary kind of RISC style, like do whatever the hell you want with them registers. And just essentially, once you enter into Suite 16 at a certain memory address in the ROM, you then, every other instruction you submit is some or instruction to this CPU, right? So let's see if I can actually show something in this. All right, let me go back over here. All right, so let's see. Apple II. All right, let's see if this works. All right. Does this look familiar to anybody? Okay. Does this look familiar to anybody? All right, so everybody remember what you had? Like, what am I in right now? I would scream it out if you remember what I'm in right now. I'm in the monitor. Right? It's actually not. It's not actually the ASM. It's actually just a monitor. So if I were to hit addresses, I'm just going to see what happens in incremented address. This is the contents of memory.
It's like a C128 monitor too.
Yeah. It's very much. Yeah. It's almost exactly the same of a C64 or C128 monitor. It's
C128.
almost identical. Now, if I type int, actually that was the wrong thing to do. Let me do this. Yep. What was it? I'm trying to remember this.
What happens if we type in 3D0G?
3B0, let's try it. That's the contents of that actual address. All right. So what it's in the registers at that point. Well, what I want to do, let me see if I can show is, oh, wait, I have to do this. All right, so I'm going to fresh boot the system. I have to hit Control-B, which is what you would actually do on the Apple II keyboard, and then hit Enter. And now I'm in integer basic, right? So this is essentially Wozniak's original integer basic that he used to do stuff, which in and of itself is not terribly interesting to me right at the moment. Now, in an Apple IIe, you could hit this and get stuck into a mini assembler, which would just, like, you would write basically 6502 assembly, and it would just show you, what the operands and opcodes were.
-151, right?
It's called 151.
Or you can just poke it if you want.
Yeah, you can do it a lot of ways. Actually, we go back. Oops. I'm so used to using backspace. Call 151 brings me to the monitor. I want the mini assembler, which I think I need to do F6 9G. No. Actually, I don't remember what it is off the top of my head. Hold on a second. I'm doing this.
64K?
Yeah.
I can do it in this one easier. All right, so I'm going to cheat for a minute. This isn't going to be able to show you the ROM contents, but I'll just cheat for a second.
Show us some boobs.
I'm loading. All right, sweet. So to get back into the monitor, which is what the Apple II drops you in natively, call 151, and then I can shortcut. All right, now I'm in a mini assembler, right? So I can do whatever would be normal. So I can do. Let's actually just. These instructions won't make any difference at the moment because the actual image isn't in the ROM, but.
I wrote a text editor from the monitor. Used a lot of paper, especially
All right.
the target addresses.
All right, so from here, let's just do this. So this first save instruction down here is where he saves the contents of whatever the contents of the current registers are, right? He manages to save. So it's just implemented, in this case, ASR save, which is labeled something. But just to show how this works in general, I'll do something simple, like, right, so whatever the instructions would be to, like, say, load its immediate address. So, like, LDY pound $0, right? Oops. It's giving me it. Let's just do it. Oh, it's F6.
One was typed in basic with homebrew computer.
Sweet.
He was doing it from hex.
Yeah, that's how I used to do it.
Yeah.
Across C64 because there was no assembler.
It was faster.
Poke it all in.
Yeah.
You had to compile. You had to figure out all the opcodes yourself by
And
hand.
he did it.
Oh, wait.
He did it during the random access period, or during the mapping period. So when the random access period came.
All right. So the 1000 is just a label, right? It's just like where I'm starting. And then A500 which is A5 is the opcode for load into, right? That's all I wanted to show. Do you want to show source code for Multics?
I'd love to share that. I see Hikari over here. I think we might be running late. I do still want to do the giveaways, so maybe I know they have a couple announcements. Oh, 10 more minutes. Oh, awesome.
Do the giveaways.
Let's do some giveaways for those of you still here. So let's see. What do I have? Yeah, and don't come up. I guess we'll have it handed out. So maybe I can show this, show what I have on the monitor here or something. I don't know. Or just the VGA. All right. So this actually is not nostalgic, but I'll give it away first just so that most of you see it, if you guys can see or read that. It's Elements of Computing Systems based on First Principles. This came out last year. Jose Nazario pointed out to me. Basically, it's 323 pages, including the index. Goes through hardware primitives, designing your computer from hardware. I start with hardware, eventually machine language, assembler, then a compiler for a higher level language, implement a virtual machine, and then write an operating system on top of that, and finally some programs within your operating system. So who wants to prove Rob Pike wrong, that systems research is not irrelevant? Who's read Rob Pike, Systems Research is Irrelevant? Jake has. Fuck. Okay, if you haven't read that, everyone in here needs to read that. I'll have some like post requisites for this talk posted at archiver.com/torcon8, and I'll type that up later. Is anyone interested in this? Wants to build a computer from scratch, like a fucking computer club, like back in the 70s? Like, come on.
Do we want to ask a skill testing question or something?
Oh, that's right. That's right. So, should I just like pick a fucking like kit computer? Okay, what was the computer kit built in war games? Okay, do you want it? It's yours. All right. Okay, this is not for giveaway, but I thought I'd show it just for fun briefly. If any of you guys like video games and ROM dumping, this is you can't really see it. It's a homemade PC Engine and TurboGrafx-16 ROM dumper. I used this to dump the last commercially released PC Engine game, 1988. So. A guy in Hong Kong made this, named Rayman, a friend of mine. So that's just kind of neat. Personally, I'm a big fan of the aesthetic of like early hacking. This is something called Shatter. Maybe you guys never saw this. It was done on a Mac 512 in 1984, printed out on a 72 DPI printer. And so since it's more an aesthetic thing than anything else, if any of you can tell me the band that wrote the song The Hacker in 1989. I should all know this. Good fucking song. Wrong. Wrong. What? Yes. Clock DVA. You get that. And you guys should all get that album. T-shirt. The T-shirt. Okay, so how many of you people know Tim Newsham? Have heard of Tim Newsham? Have heard of him, right? Okay, you don't know him necessarily? No. Okay. He put out that paper with Tom Tachik about 10 years ago about evading IDSs using fragmentation, and Cisco last week released like another vulnerability saying, oh, our IDS is vulnerable to fragmentation attacks. Anyone? Raise a hand. Okay, so here's the question. In 2004, Tim Newsham wrote a buffer overflow exploit for what version of makedir on Unix? What version of Unix? This is awesome. You guys all should have been like laughing your asses off on Security Focus or like Bug Track or whatever this was. That was a funny one. See, this is awesome. This is totally old school. No one saw Tim Newsham's buffer overflow for makedir? Not System 5. Okay. What version was the Lions book?
Hint.
Yeah, what version was the Lions book? V7, yes, absolutely. What's your name? Okay. So you just won a shirt of something that Tim Newsham wrote. And this is the first in a line of Noosh-erts. And this is really offensive, which is why I'm giving it away. Put the microphone down, Gray. Okay, sorry. Can you read that? I met your daughter on MySpace, and all I got was a lousy blowjob and this T-shirt. So. There you go. Okay, and then the last giveaway.
Busted.
Deluxe letterbox version of War Games. Laserdisc. So.
Here, I'll hand that to somebody, Gray.
I have at my house.
Oh, I've got 2 Laserdisc players.
Do you have to flip yours yourself, or does
Okay, so, and this has a lot of personal significance for me. I mean, this was like the movie that was inspiration for me. And like in 91, 92, I felt like I plateaued. So this is where I reveal like my dark past. The way I originally got internet access, if Chris Eagle's in the room or Johnny Cash, they both, well, Johnny Cash just graduated from the Naval Graduate School, which is the Monterey area. It's the only non-toll call I could make that had internet access back then. And so yeah, I would like go on to IRC through nps.navy.mil, which nowadays is nps.edu, so I don't really feel like I'm revealing too much anymore. And on top of that, okay, Naval Graduate School, NPS, their password for their portmaster was NPS. So it wasn't like, you know, very difficult, right? But that's probably like my claim to fame from back in like 91, 92. And so I guess the question for the giveaway, kind of. So, and this is more urban lore. It's not on Wikipedia or anything like that. There is a scene in here which supposedly on television broadcast was edited out because they were afraid that people would actually follow the technique. Okay, well, what was it? So what was the scene that they... That's right, the payphone. There you go. So, but you got a shirt, so I got to give it to someone else. So between a different question. Go, Dan. Dan, you pick a question.
This is a question that I don't necessarily expect anybody to get, but whoever gets closest will get it. All right. Name the year in which the last publicly known, like non-private, publicly known, if not publicly accessible, Multics machine was shut down.
Good question.
All right, wait. So I'm gonna. All right. So raise your hands if you think you have a guess. All right. What do you think? 2003. Okay. Go ahead. 2004. 2005. 2001. All right. It was 2000, and it was closest to 2001. Who's won? All right.
All right, I think that's it. Oh, wait, no. So on top of that, like Hikari...
Dan, you got to be the closest without going over.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess it was late in the year.
So the last thing, and this is like just not even a giveaway of any importance, but so the past couple years, and actually Hikari and I got to know each other because we're both vegetarians and hackers. And we've sort of been organizing vegetarian hacking outings. So in this brown bag here, I have a piece of vegan chocolate raspberry cake from Follow Your Heart in, I don't know, like the Valley.
Either
it's
that
good.
or a finger.
So who here is a vegetarian and a hacker? Okay, you get it. All right. With the glasses and the beard.
Kind of funny. What is that again? Vegetarian, vegan cake.
That was so anticlimactic.
That was hilarious.
I owe you later. So I think that's more or less, I mean, we could talk for ages. If you want to come up here and check out like this Out of the Inner Circle book, it's awesome. The description of worm, because it predated the Morse worm, is really interesting. So come on, we'll shoot the shit, but I guess we should probably turn it over unless anyone else, let's go one by one, see if anyone else has anything else to say. All right.
Party time.
Thanks for staying late.
Thank you.
Actually, I got a couple of quick announcements.